Hola y bienvenidos a esta clase de español en la que vamos a aprender cuándo hay que usar el verbo ser y cuándo hay que usar el verbo estar. Hello and welcome to the Spanish lesson in which we're going to learn when we need to use the verb ser, to be, and when we need to use the other verb to be, which is estar. You may have heard people say, oh well, ser is for permanent things, estar is for impermanent things. I mean, it's useful, but it doesn't make sense 100% of the time. Why do I say, la biblioteca está en el centro? The library is in the center. Using the verb estar, surely the library is going to be there permanently. Yeah. Why do I say someone está muerto? They're dead. I'm using estar. Well, it's quite a permanent thing, depending on your religious beliefs. Well, there's a really useful acronym, doctor, place, and this will help you get it right 100% of the time. So to help us know when to use the verb ser instead of estar, we have the acronym doctor, or doctor in Spanish, and this stands for description, origin, characteristic, time, occupation, and relation, and I'm going to show you examples of every single one of those a bit later in the video. The verb estar, we know to use this one when we're talking about position, location, an action that someone's doing or is happening, a condition, or an emotion, and that gives us the acronym place. So all we need to remember is for ser we use doctor, and for estar, place. So now let's take a look at some examples of the doctor acronym to see when we need to use ser and why. Descriptions. Well, if I'm describing a person or a place or a thing, it's going to be ser. For example, el parque es grande. The park is big. I'm describing the park as big. Eres alto, or tú eres alto. You are tall. I'm describing you as tall. With the origin of someone or something, if I'm French, I would say soy francés. In this case, it does make sense in terms of permanence. Soy de Francia. I can also say I am from France. So both ways describing nationality or place of origin, I'm using soy. Soy francés, soy de Francia. Soy italiano, soy de Italia. But also describing a thing. La pasta es italiana. Pasta is Italian, or we could also interpret this as pasta comes from Italy. I'm showing the origin of pasta. If you want to start a small-scale war, you could say la arepa es colombiana or la arepa es venezolana. Characteristic. Somos generosos. We are generous. We're describing a characteristic of our personality, kind of overlapping with description because I'm describing us as generous. If I'm describing someone as tall, you could argue that's a characteristic, so those two do overlap quite a bit. Another example, ella es inteligente. She is intelligent. It's a characteristic. It's also a description. For the time, we always use ser, never estar. If it's 1 o'clock, I'd say es la una. If it's 3:30, son las 3:30. If I'm saying 4:45 using 24-hour clock, son las 4:45. And here we can see an example which kind of breaks the mold of permanence and impermanence, because if I'm saying it's 1 o'clock, well, it's not going to be 1 o'clock for long, because time is always moving. It's very impermanent. But I'm always going to use ser. So ser doesn't always apply to things that are permanent. It can be things that are temporary as well. Like an occupation, another example. If I say soy profesor, and for this you don't need un or una, you just use ser followed by the occupation. Soy profesor, I'm a teacher. Well, I might leave the profession, I might do something else, but I'm still using ser. Ella es abogada, she is a lawyer. And finally we have relation, which with family members, it can make sense in terms of permanence. Ella es mi mamá, or ella es mi madre. She is my mum. Well, that's not going to change. But think of friendship. It can change. Friends come and go. But I'd still say, él es mi amigo. He is my friend. Somos amigos. We're friends. Even if we've just made the friendship, next week it might be all over. I'm still going to use ser because I'm talking about a relation. Now let's see some examples of when to use estar, being guided by the acronym place. So for position, location, action, condition, and emotion, I could say things like el libro está encima de la mesa. The book is on top of the table. This does make sense in terms of it being temporary because it can move around, but remember it doesn't always make sense because if I say la biblioteca está en el centro, the library is in the center, I mean you could demolish the library. Let's see another example. How about Madrid está en España. Madrid is in Spain. Well, that's not going to change. España está en Europa. Spain is in Europe. That's also not going to change in the short term, maybe over the period of millions and millions of years with continental drift, but Spanish isn't that deep. It's essentially because we're talking about location, that's why we're using estar. With action, this is quite a big one because whenever I'm using what we call the gerund or the present continuous or the past continuous, I need to use estar. So any of those words that end in ando or yendo, like estudiando, escribiendo, I need to use that with estar. I can put estar in any tense, but it's always going to be estar. For example, estoy estudiando, I am studying. If it was yesterday, estuve estudiando. With the rain, está lloviendo, right now it's raining. It's an action. Even though it's not being done by a person, it's still an action. So you will never see, or you should never see, ser followed by a gerund, one of those words that ends in ando or yendo. Condition and emotion, these two overlap a bit like description and characteristic for ser. If I'm talking about a condition, well, something like la comida está fría, the food is cold. It's obviously not describing emotion, it's describing the condition of the food. La comida está fría. Or if someone asks me if the heating's on, sí, la calefacción está prendida. Or está encendida. Yes, the heating is on. It's the condition of the heating. I'm describing its condition. I'm using estar. For emotion, which can also kind of overlap, if I say something like mis padres están tristes, my parents are sad, or yo estoy feliz, then I'm describing the emotions of people. I'm always going to use estar. Something that's important to bear in mind is that there are some cases where you could use ser, you could use estar, and either one would create a grammatically correct structure, a grammatically correct sentence, but it would change the meaning. For example, with feliz, happy, if I said soy feliz, it means I'm a happy person. I'm describing a characteristic, I'm describing me. Remember the D and the C from doctor, descriptions, characteristics. Whereas if I say estoy feliz, then think of place. At the end we have C and E, condition and emotion. I'm describing my current condition, my current emotion. Estoy feliz, right now I'm happy. Soy feliz, I'm a happy person. In more extreme cases, it can even change the meaning of the adjective. Here they both mean happy, but if I say soy aburrido, it means I'm a boring person. Whereas if I say estoy aburrido, it means I'm bored. So boring and bored, depending on whether I'm saying soy, describing a characteristic, describing myself, or estoy, in which I'm describing my current condition, my current emotion. Another example is soy ciego, I'm blind. It's more of a permanent thing, whereas estoy ciego could mean I'm currently blind, but I'm not normally blind. So if you don't have blindness for the rest of your life, you might have had a head injury and you were blind for a few days, you would use estar. But this is used more than anything metaphorically to say like, oh, I was blind to the red flags or something. En esa relación estuve muy ciego. In that relationship I was very blind, because it's for a period of time. Equally, if you did have a medical issue that made you blind for 5 days and then you regained your sight, por 5 días estuve ciego. For 5 days I was blind. I wouldn't say era ciego. In this case it does kind of make sense with permanence and impermanence, but it makes even more sense when we think of doctor place. Soy ciego, it's a characteristic, it's not going to change, it's a description of me. The other one, estar, I'm describing a condition. The same with sordo, to be deaf or sorda. If I had a really loud concert yesterday, hoy estoy muy sordo, today I'm really deaf, tomorrow my hearing will come back. If I say el gazpacho es frío, I'm describing the characteristic of gazpacho. It's a cold soup. It's designed to be a cold soup. Whereas if I'm served a soup in a restaurant and I want to complain because it should be hot, I could say la sopa está fría. The soup is cold. I'm describing a condition of the soup. What I want you to do in a moment is pause the video and try and fill in the gaps, either in your head or on a piece of paper or in your Spanish book if it's Spanish homework, with the correct form of ser or estar. I've put the English translations on there to help you, and I've put in purple the thing that would kind of give you a clue as to whether it's a characteristic, it's a location, it's a time, and so on. So pause the video, and when you're ready for the answers, just press play. Okay, let's go through. So the first one, mi hermano está llorando. My brother is crying. Because it's an ando word, ando, yendo, it's a present continuous, it's a gerund, it's an action. Está triste porque terminó con su novia. He is sad because he finished with his girlfriend. Sadness, it's a condition, it's an emotion. Mi casa es blanca y azul. I'm describing, it's the D from doctor, description of the house. Está en un pueblo pequeño que se llama Abriaquí. Doctor place has taught me location. I need to use estar. Me dijeron que la playa es grande y bonita, pero no sé dónde está. They told me that the beach is big and beautiful, big and pretty. That's a description, it's a characteristic, but I don't know where it is. Once again, we're talking about location. Location is one of the big ones where I see people time and time again using ser instead of estar. Just a quick reminder to hit that like button if you found this video useful, if you found it interesting. It really means a lot to me and it helps me to know which videos people have found most useful. If you haven't already done so, please do hit that subscribe button.